What's up, everybody? Hope everybody's doing well. I'm here with my Week 3 NFL DraftKings picks. So before we can get to this week's picks, I want to take a look back at Week 2 and do a recap. I had some picks that did well. I had some picks that didn't do so well, so let's go ahead and dive right in. Okay, so the first two players that I suggest that ended up doing pretty well was Cam Newton and Kelvin Benjamin. This stack probably won quite a few people money if they ended up doing it this week, as long as you nailed your other positions, or at least somewhat nailed them, honestly. That's how many points Cam and Kelvin ended up dropping this week. I also mentioned playing Greg Olsen with these two and pairing all three of them. If you did that, you probably did pretty well too. Greg Olsen ended up putting up well over 20 DraftKings points as well. He had a big 78-yard or 88-yard touchdown, I believe. So he ended up having a good game as well. Then we have the other Benjamin, that's Travis Benjamin, no relation to Kelvin as far as I know. And he ended up having a big game as well. Unfortunately, that has some correlation to do with Danny Woodhead going down with that ACL tear. So, it just sucks for the Chargers, man. 2 weeks in a row now they've gone down with the ACL tears to pretty important players, to actually very important players on that team. So that's some correlation there, but he still ended up having a really good game and basically put up the same amount of numbers that Kelvin Benjamin did. And then you have LeGarrette Blount, who did his work all on the ground. He didn't have a single reception, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but he was able to get in the end zone. And it's nice to see somebody like LeGarrette Blount, who's not going to get it done through the air. It's nice to see that there's still a place for ground and pound runners in a PPR situation. So those are some of my good picks. Now, some of my not so good picks, we have Danny Woodhead. We have Allen Robinson, Steve Smith, and Odell Beckham Jr. Now, Danny Woodhead went down with an injury. Allen Robinson was just bad. He didn't get the targets I was expecting him to get. He only had about 5 targets, I think it was. Then we have Steve Smith, who, again, kind of got outshined by Mike Wallace. I believe Mike Wallace had 2 touchdowns. And then you have Odell Beckham Jr., who still put up over 16 points, but at $9,500, I believe he was, 16 points is not enough. You need to be putting up, at least 25 plus, as far as I'm concerned, to make it worth to spend that much on him. So I was really disappointed with Odell, and those were some of my worst picks. Okay, so let's move into some Week 3 picks now. Now, before we get to those picks, I want to mention really quickly that the projected point totals that you see below each of the players is from fantasylabs.com. And those projected point totals can and will change a lot throughout the week. Sometimes they only change a few tenths of a point. Sometimes they can change dramatically. You could see Jarvis Landry go from a 19-point total to a 25-point projected total. So if you want to get the most up-to-date projections on these players, then be sure to go to that website. You can check other sites as well. It doesn't really matter. I'm not affiliated with Fantasy Labs in any way. That's just a site that I prefer to use. And so just a disclaimer that all these projected point totals are at the time of making the video and can and will change. So the first Week 3 quarterback wide receiver stack that I like a lot has to be Ryan Tannehill and Jarvis Landry. This looks like a great bounce back spot for them. They're coming off 2 tough road losses against the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots, where both of those games were right down to the wire. And Tannehill's coming off of a game against the Patriots where he threw for 389 passing yards and was just about one good pass away from at least tying that game up, if not winning it. So, he threw a pair of touchdowns in that game and had 2 interceptions as well. So that's kind of what we've come to know about Tannehill. He's kind of an up and down player. But, the one thing that people overlook on Tannehill the most is that he has some rushing ability. Now, he did have a rushing touchdown in Week 1 against Seattle, and it's not something that I would bank on, but because of that rushing ability that he does have, he's going to get you, at least about, close to 20 rushing yards a game just because he's going to scramble and pick up a first down or 2. Rarely will they actually have a designed run for him, but I think that's something that's worth mentioning. So if you like his ability to run and you think that maybe he could run some in this game, maybe he could be worth just playing by himself. Now, the reason I like Tannehill so much this week is because of his price. At $6,200, he is so cheap, and I think he's actually going to be kind of popular. I hope he isn't. I haven't really got a gauge yet on what other people are thinking, but I really hope this stack is not too popular, but I think it will be, unfortunately. Now, the player that he's going to be throwing to, or at least I think he's going to be throwing to the most, and that's Jarvis Landry. he's my favorite play of the week. Even if I'm not playing Tannehill in my lineups, I'm going to have Jarvis Landry more than likely in my lineup because at 6,600, a number one receiver who's going to get as much volume and as many targets as Jarvis Landry is, he's almost a must-play in my opinion. We can take a look back at here at his game logs. Jarvis Landry hasn't had a game without double-digit targets since last season against the Baltimore Ravens, and that was all the way back on December 6th. He only had 5 targets that game and only had 2 catches. The very next week, they come back and throw the ball to him 18 times. He had 18 targets in that game. So he's gone a little while without scoring a touchdown, but that doesn't really scare me. I like him to get in the end zone this week. I like him to get in the end zone a couple times this week against the Cleveland Browns defense. So this next stack that I like is Aaron Rodgers and Jordy Nelson. So obviously they're nowhere near as cheap as a Tannehill Landry stack, but for obvious reasons, they are a good play. Now, Aaron Rodgers is interesting because in the past 9 games, regular season games that is, he has not thrown for over 300 yards, and he's thrown an interception in all but 3 of those games. So I think Aaron Rodgers is due for a big game. I like him to throw for 3+ touchdowns this week. I like him to throw for well over 300 passing yards. And to do that, he's going to have to go back to his main man, Jordy Nelson. Jordy Nelson, this is only going to be his 3rd week since coming back from that ACL injury. And his price has actually gone down after the first few weeks of the season. He was 7,700 week 1 against Jacksonville. He was 7,500 on the road against the Minnesota Vikings. And now sitting at 7,400, Jordy Nelson is a really, really good option to pair with Aaron Rodgers. He had 11 targets against the Minnesota Vikings last week. He had 9 targets in week 1 against the Jacksonville Jaguars and had receiving touchdowns in both of those games. He just hasn't had a ton of actual, he's getting the targets, he's just not having a ton of actual production out of them. So I think he's due for a big game. A lot of people are still scared to play Nelson because they still think that he's not 100%. Nelson played nearly 95% of the offensive snaps last week against the Vikings. So that right there tells you that they want to have him on the field no matter what because 1, they think that they have the best chance to win when he's on the field, but 2, they're not scared that he's going to get hurt, trying to block for a run play or something stupid like that. So I like Aaron Rodgers and Jordy Nelson a lot this week, and I think they have a high chance to blow up and put up a lot of points. So the third and final stack that I have this weekend is Blake Bortles and Allen Robinson. Now this stack did not fare me too well in week 2, and that's the exact reason I'm going back to it. I don't think anybody are going to have these 2 guys. I think everybody's going to stay away from Bortles and Allen Robinson, and maybe even Hearns too. Hearns had an okay game. I mean, it was not good by any means, but much better than Robinson had in my opinion. So Blake Bortles kind of does not have this reputation when I think he should. He is the master at salvaging games more times than not as far as when it comes to a daily fantasy perspective and just fantasy perspective in general. The guy last week, they absolutely got throttled by the San Diego Chargers, and he was still able to put up 24.6 points. He had over 300 passing yards, threw for a pair of touchdowns. He did have 2 interceptions, and even had 34 rushing yards. So he is great at doing that, but the thing that really scared me last week was that he did not throw the ball to Allen Robinson like we're accustomed to seeing. Allen Robinson only had 5 targets, so I don't know if it was just because Jason Verrett was scaring him because he was shadowing Robinson, or if just that in secondary in general scared him, or what, but he did not throw the ball to Allen Robinson like we're used to seeing. And the reason I say that is just because in the week 1, Allen Robinson had 15 targets, 15 of them. Now, he only hauled in 6 receptions, and he's kind of been off to a really, really slow year this season, Allen Robinson is, so he's kind of due for a big game. And, if we go off recency bias, I don't think many people are going to have these 2 guys. So that's one of the reasons I like them a lot. Allen Robinson's still kind of expensive for the production we've seen this season, but the reason he's so expensive at the $7,500 mark is just because of the potential we know he can produce. So I like them this weekend. If you don't want to go with Allen Robinson and you want to go to a cheaper option, definitely go with Allen Hearns. Maybe even consider Julius Thomas. Julius Thomas scares me a little bit, though, because the Jacksonville Jaguars are not scared to throw the ball to Mercedes Lewis right now. Mercedes Lewis snuck into the end zone last week, too. So I really like these 2 guys, and I am going to play some Allen Hearns as well. Okay, so moving on to running backs now. The first guy that I want to talk about is Melvin Gordon. Now, this particular play is probably going to be really, really popular and really, really common this week, but it's pretty easy to understand why. With Keenan Allen and Danny Woodhead going down now with ACL injuries, the Chargers production has to go somewhere, and it's probably going to go through this Melvin Gordon guy, And last season, he was pretty much allergic to getting into the end zone, and this season, he's already been into the end zone 3 times, and he's had some really good chances. He's had some actually really good production in the limited chances that he's had this year. In Week 1, he only had 14 carries, but he was able to get into the end zone twice. In Week 2, he ended up having 24 rushing attempts and had over 100 rushing yards, which I believe was the first time in his career. Now, one thing that the Chargers really like to do is get their running backs involved in the pass game. I really don't see anybody else on the Chargers as far as running back goes that can really replace Danny Woodhead. So either they're going to have to change what they want to do, gameplay style, or they're going to have to figure out if Melvin Gordon can do this or not. Going up against the Indianapolis defense, I believe they are this week. And they are. Now, they are on the road, but going up against the Indianapolis Colts defense will be interesting because we saw that they were really vulnerable to the receiving running back in Theo Riddick, and even Amir Abdullah, when they were facing the Lions, got in on the receiving game as well. So if Melvin Gordon has any potential of being a somewhat reliable receiving running back and kind of can at least fill in some of the gap that Danny Woodhead has left with that injury, then we'll see it this week because they are very vulnerable to that. Okay, so the next running back that I like is DeMarco Murray. He's a really interesting play this week for me, and the reason I like him this week is because I don't think anybody's going to have him. Around this price range, there's a lot of different directions you can go, and I just don't think a lot of people are going to think, oh, I should go DeMarco Murray. Because first off, if you want, the big popular play around this price range is going to be Melvin Gordon. He's cheaper. He's probably got a higher floor. But the reason I like DeMarco Murray is I think he has a higher ceiling. And the reason that being is because we know for a fact DeMarco Murray can produce in the pass game. In these first 2 weeks of the season, DeMarco Murray has had 7 targets in each of those games. Last week against the Detroit Lions, he caught all 7 of them. And then in Week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings, he caught 5 of those, but 2 of those he went in the end zone for receiving touchdowns. So DeMarco Murray can get it done through the air, but last week he also did it on the ground against the Detroit Lions. He had just 12 attempts, but had 89 rushing yards. That's 7.5 yards per carry. That's really, really good. And a lot of people are worried that Derrick Henry is going to be taking away some of the market share and workload from DeMarco Murray. And somewhere down the road, I think he will. But right now, DeMarco Murray is playing pretty well. And this is the first sign of life that I've really seen out of him since he's left Dallas, in my opinion. So I like him a lot this weekend. I'm not going to go overboard on him, but I am going to have some of them. So the third and final running back that I want to talk about is Charles Sims. We now know that Doug Martin is not going to play, so that means all the production that Charles Sims has posted at this point is going to be multiplied. So that makes him a really, really interesting play for me. At just 4,900, I really like it. He's going up against the LA Rams, and a lot of people are going to be scared to play him because of that, because we've seen that the Rams, when the defense is on, they can really shut down a pretty good offensive team. We saw them do it against the Seattle Seahawks. Although, with a hurt Russell Wilson, can you really take that for what it is? I don't know. I still think the Rams defense is better than a lot of people have been giving them credit for. But with that said, we've seen 2 sides of the Rams defense. We've seen them give up 28 points to Blaine Gabbert and the San Francisco 49ers. We've seen them, limit the Seattle Seahawks to just 3 points. So we don't really know what we're going to get there, but I like what I see out of Charles Sims. I'm not going to have a ton of him because of that Rams defense, but I am going to have him some. I don't think anybody's going to have him, like I said earlier, and I just think that he's going to get a really, really healthy bump in workload. Obviously, since Martin's not going to be there, so I'm going to be playing quite a bit of him, but I don't want to go too overboard because I don't want to go ride or die with him. So I like Sims this weekend. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on these receivers since I've already given out 3 others in those QB wide receiver stacks. But I like Travis Benjamin because he's so cheap. I like Larry Fitzgerald because, again, he's cheap, and I think he's just the best receiver to probably go within that price range. I like Brandon Marshall. There's some rumors going around right now, or at least there's some reports, I guess I should say, that his knee is still bothering him and he didn't practice too much this week so far. So if he doesn't play, I like Eric Decker. I know Eric Decker is actually dealing with a shoulder injury as well. If you want me to, I'm going to keep you guys up to date. Be sure to follow me on Twitter. I'm going to start tweeting out about some of this stuff. So right now, I like Brandon Marshall if he plays, but if he doesn't, I may be going in a different direction. So just be sure to follow me on Twitter. Stay posted. So a few tight ends that I like this weekend are Antonio Gates and Delaney Walker. Now, in the big tournaments, I'm going to be looking at Antonio Gates. Obviously, with Keenan Allen going down and Woodhead, I've talked about a few different Chargers that you can replace them with now. So I will not be playing all three of them. I will not have a lineup with Melvin Gordon, Travis Benjamin, and Antonio Gates. So kind of just pick one of the guys that you want to roll with the most. I will have some lineups with Melvin and Travis Benjamin, but I'm not going to have any with all three, Antonio Gates and those other two guys. So just kind of a little disclaimer there. That said, I like Antonio Gates in the big tournaments because I think that he has a chance to have a big game. So far, we haven't really seen him have a huge game yet, so maybe he's due, or maybe he's just getting old, and because he's not on steroids, he can't produce anymore. So we'll see. Delaney Walker is a much safer play, and he's not like he's a significant amount more. So I like Delaney Walker being a lot safer this week. And he's also going up against the worst defense in the NFL currently, and that's the Oakland Raiders. So I like him. As far as defenses go, I like the Cincinnati defense. There's really no rhyme or reason. It's just kind of, like I said, every week it's almost kind of like a shot in the dark. Last week was a little bit different. You could have went heavily into the Broncos. I didn't mention the Broncos because selfishly I kind of wanted to save the pick for myself, but a lot of people ended up going with them anyway. So I like the Cincinnati defense against the Broncos this week. Hopefully they can force a couple turnovers against Trevor Siemian and whatnot. So that's going to do it for this week's picks. If you have any other questions or concerns or whatever, or you want to get updates, be sure to follow me on Twitter. I also live stream on twitch.tv sometimes. I usually play Madden or MLB The Show or something like that. So if you're into that kind of stuff, be sure to follow me on there as well. And, let me know down in the comments section if you have any different picks or plays that you think that I should be going with. And hope you guys enjoyed. Later.